What happens when ordinary people are given absolute power? Do they rise to the occasion using their authority for good? Or does power corrupt, turning them into tyrants? In 1971, a groundbreaking experiment at Stanford University explored the dark side of human nature, revealing how easily we can succumb to the allure of power. This is the story of the Stanford Prison Experiment. In the summer of 1971, Dr. Philip Zimbardo, a young psychology professor, designed an experiment to study the psychological effects of prison life. He wanted to understand how the power dynamics inherent in a prison environment would influence the behavior of both guards and prisoners. To conduct the experiment, Zimbardo transformed the basement of the Stanford Psychology building into a mock prison. He recruited 24 male college students, all deemed psychologically healthy, and randomly assigned them to be either guards or prisoners. The experiment began with the arrest of the prisoners at their homes by real police officers. These officers, unaware of the experiment's true nature, followed standard procedures, adding a layer of authenticity to the initial phase. The participants who had volunteered for the study were taken by surprise, experiencing the shock and confusion of a real arrest. They were then transported to the mock prison, a meticulously designed environment meant to replicate the conditions of a real correctional facility. Upon arrival, they were stripped, deloused, and given prison uniforms and numbers, stripping them of their personal identities and reducing them to mere numbers in the system. The guards, dressed in khaki uniforms and armed with whistles and batons, were instructed to maintain order but were given no specific guidelines on how to do so. This lack of direction led to a wide range of behaviors, as the guards interpreted their roles in various ways, some taking a more authoritarian approach than others. What started as a simulated exercise quickly took on a life of its own. The boundaries between reality and the experiment blurred, and the participants began to internalize their roles. The environment became increasingly tense and volatile as both guards and prisoners adapted to their new identities. The guards, embracing their roles with unexpected zeal, began to assert their authority, imposing increasingly harsh rules and punishments on the prisoners. Their actions, initially meant to maintain order, soon escalated into acts of cruelty and domination as they tested the limits of their power. The prisoners, stripped of their identities and subjected to constant surveillance and humiliation, became passive and withdrawn. The psychological toll of the experiment was evident as they lost their sense of self and autonomy, becoming mere subjects in a controlled environment. The experiment revealed the profound impact of power dynamics and the human capacity for both dominance and submission. As the days turned into nights, the lines between reality and role-playing blurred. The guards, emboldened by their power, engaged in increasingly abusive behavior, forcing the prisoners to clean toilets with their bare hands, perform humiliating tasks, and endure sleep deprivation. The prisoners, stripped of their dignity and hope, began to exhibit signs of extreme stress, depression, and emotional breakdowns. One prisoner, identified only as #8612, suffered a complete mental breakdown after just 36 hours, screaming, crying, and exhibiting signs of acute anxiety. Despite his distress, it took the intervention of Christina Maslach, a graduate student and Zimbardo's girlfriend, to convince Zimbardo to release him from the experiment. The situation continued to deteriorate, with the guards becoming increasingly cruel and the prisoners exhibiting signs of severe psychological distress. Zimbardo himself, caught up in his role as the prison superintendent, failed to recognize the ethical implications of the experiment, allowing the abuse to continue. Finally, after just 6 days, the experiment was abruptly halted. Zimbardo, confronted with the horrifying reality of his creation, realized the extent to which the situation had spiraled out of control. The guards were relieved of their duties and the prisoners were released, forever marked by their experience. The Stanford Prison Experiment sent shockwaves through the academic community and beyond, raising profound questions about the nature of power, authority, and the dark side of human nature. Conducted in the early 1970s by psychologist Philip Zimbardo, the experiment aimed to investigate how individuals would behave when placed in a simulated prison environment. The results were both shocking and deeply unsettling. Zimbardo argued that the experiment demonstrated the power of the situation, suggesting that even ordinary, well-intentioned individuals are capable of committing acts of cruelty and abuse when placed in positions of power. The guards, who were given authority over the prisoners, quickly began to exhibit abusive behaviors, while the prisoners became submissive and showed signs of severe emotional distress. The experiment also highlighted the dangers of de-individuation, a psychological process in which individuals lose their sense of self and personal responsibility when they become part of a group. This loss of identity can lead to behaviors that individuals would not typically engage in if they were acting alone. In the Stanford Prison Experiment, both guards and prisoners experienced this phenomenon. In the context of the experiment, both guards and prisoners became de-individuated, adopting the behaviors and norms of their assigned roles, even when those roles conflicted with their personal values and beliefs. The guards, in particular, took on their roles with alarming zeal, enforcing strict and often cruel rules, while the prisoners became increasingly passive and helpless. This experiment remains a powerful reminder of how situational forces can shape human behavior in profound and often disturbing ways. The Stanford Prison Experiment remains one of the most controversial studies in the history of psychology. Conducted in the early 1970s by Dr. Philip Zimbardo at Stanford University, the experiment aimed to investigate the psychological effects of perceived power by assigning volunteers to the roles of guards and prisoners in a simulated prison environment. Critics argue that the experiment was ethically flawed, citing the potential for psychological harm to the participants and the lack of informed consent. They point out that the participants were subjected to extreme stress and dehumanizing conditions, which led to emotional breakdowns and lasting psychological effects for some. Others question the scientific validity of the experiment, arguing that the small sample size, artificial setting, and Zimbardo's active role as the prison superintendent compromised the objectivity of the results. They suggest that the participants' behavior was influenced by demand characteristics, where they acted in ways they believed were expected of them. Despite the controversy, the Stanford Prison Experiment continues to provoke debate and discussion about the nature of power, the dangers of unchecked authority, and the ethical boundaries of scientific research. It has been referenced in numerous academic papers, documentaries, and even popular culture, highlighting its enduring impact on our understanding of human behavior. It serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of human nature and the ease with which we can succumb to the seductive allure of power. The experiment's legacy continues to challenge and inspire new generations of psychologists, ethicists, and scholars to reflect on the profound implications of authority and human behavior.